The Academy Awards, still technically the biggest night in Hollywood, but increasingly feeling like an expensive group project where half the participants didn't do the reading. The 2024 Oscars had some solid winners, some questionable snubs, and at least one film that made people wonder whether the Academy even knows what it's voting on anymore. It's starting to feel less like a celebration of cinema and more like a lottery. Let's start with Anura, the film that won Best Picture. Now, was this a good choice? Sure. Safe? Absolutely. But when you look at what wasn't even considered, it becomes clear that the Academy's priorities continue to be, at best, out of sync with audiences and at worst, actively self sabotaging. Films like Dune Part 2 were dismissed even before they had a chance, not because they weren't worthy, but because, by the voters' own admission, they didn't bother watching it. Why? Because they found the first one boring, a staggering level of professionalism from people whose literal job is to judge films. Now, I'll be honest, I thought the first Dune was alright, but Dune Part 2, it's the definitive sci fi blockbuster of the decade. Stunning visuals, brilliant performances, and the kind of creative storytelling that proves big budget films don't have to be mindless CGI fests. But instead of celebrating that, we got the cinematic equivalent of did not do the homework. Then there's the case of Ray Fiennes, who was nominated this year for the Conclave but didn't win. And that's fine. But if you ask the Academy voters why, there's a good chance some of them would say, hasn't he already won one? Except he hasn't at all. The person they were thinking of, Adrian Brody, an entirely different actor. Now, The Conclave isn't the kind of film that dominates mainstream conversation, but Fiend's performance was widely praised, and yet it never really felt like he was a serious contender. It's yet another case of the Academy seemingly making up its own logic for why certain actors are due and others are not, regardless of what actually happens on screen. And yet, the Academy wants to act like it's the definitive voice in cinema. Which brings us to Emilia Perez, a film that got nominated for multiple Oscars, much to the confusion of anyone who actually follows cinema. Even more confusing when you realize that it didn't exactly set the world on fire critically or commercially. So, how did it get so many nominations? If you are waiting for a satisfying answer, so am I. At this point, the Oscars just seem to operate in their own bizarre ecosystem where mainstream appeal and audience engagement doesn't really matter, which might explain why the ratings have been declining for years. So, how to fix this situation? Well, major football awards like FIFA's The Best combine peer votes with audience input. The Brit Awards, one of the biggest nights in music, does something similar. You get a mix of expert insight and actual engagement from the people who keep the industry alive, the viewers. Maybe the Oscars should consider it. Because right now it feels like a dinner party where the guests aren't allowed to talk and half the hosts are guessing who made the food. You know, it's horrible.